Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for coming, and thanks to the RISE program for inviting us to present this project. This work is joint with Talha and Drabi, and in this project we're trying to understand whether or not performance pay contracts can allow schools to attract and retain higher quality teachers. So we're interested in the role that these contracts can have on the sorting margin. Before we jump into the project, I just want to give a shout out to our fantastic team at the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan who implemented this project. So the background we want to have in mind for this study is that there's huge variation in teacher quality, especially in developing countries. So the graph on the left-hand side here shows controlling for school fixed effects. So this is variation in teacher quality within schools. That if I'm a child in kind of the average classroom, we're going to normalize to say that I'm getting the equivalent of 10 months of learning. If I happen to get lucky and get a teacher that's up here in the 95th percentile, I'm actually getting the equivalent of 50% more learning because I happen to get lucky and get a good teacher, whereas my friend in a neighboring class a few rooms away who got unlucky and got a teacher down in the 5th percentile is learning about a third of what I'm experiencing. So there's this huge variation in the quality of learning that students are experiencing. Now, for policymakers, it's a real challenge because the kinds of characteristics that are going to be available at the time of hiring, like years of experience and credentials, don't really predict very much of this variation. It's really hard to tell ex ante who are these guys and who are these guys. And so what we can do is rely on contract theory, an answer that we have from contract theory, which is that it's okay if the principal can't identify who are the good teachers and who are the bad teachers, as long as the employees themselves know who's a better teacher and who's a worse teacher. If you offer performance pay, what should happen in theory is that the high types, the high quality teachers know they're a good teacher, and so they sort in response to these new contracts, whereas the teachers who know that they're not very good and would end up getting a quite low salary under these performance pay contracts self-select out. Now, in developing countries, there's actually been a huge increase in the prevalence of these types of contracts, and we have a growing amount of literature on the effect of these contracts for the existing stock of employees. So what our contribution is going to be here is specifically about looking at the sorting margin, which is a growing area of research to try to understand whether or not these contracts not only motivate the existing stock of employees, but might actually change who ends up staying a teacher or leaving the school system. So that's going to be our big research question here. Does performance pay allow schools to attract and retain higher quality teachers? We're going to do this using a two-phase experiment with 250 schools. And real quickly, a preview of the findings, we do find evidence of positive sorting in response to performance pay contracts. We find that teachers who, before we introduced any of these new contracts, those who had higher value added are more likely to sort into performance pay schools over time. We also find that teachers who choose performance pay contracts also have larger direct effects. So the kind of motivational or behavioral response to the contracts are larger for those teachers. However, the kind of policy relevant magnitudes is really going to depend on how high switching costs are for teachers. So if it's really hard for individuals to change jobs or move in and out of the sector, then that's going to potentially significantly dampen the extent of positive sorting. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk you through kind of a really quick model to get us on the same page about what are the choices that we're thinking about teachers making. I'll talk you through the design and then the results. So the model we want to have in mind is, a person choosing whether to take a flat paid job or a performance paid job. So let's say there's one school that offers one type of contract and another school that offers another type of contract. And that teacher's decision of where to end up working is going to depend on what they believe their type is. Type here is going to be kind of their innate ability as a teacher in the absence of any performance pay contract. So just their underlying kind of teacher quality. I'll talk a little bit more about how we measure that soon. The other thing that's going to matter is their beliefs about how much they're going to respond to these contracts. So basically their kind of priors about what their treatment effect would be in response to performance pay. And then there might be lots of other things that affect whether or not they want to work at a certain school or another school. So from the perspective of schools offering these two types of contract, what is going to be the total effect of introducing a performance pay contract? Well, it's going to be this expression. Let me show you what this means. If I'm a school that offers performance pay versus flat pay, the difference in test scores or teacher quality that I'm going to get is the difference in people's types. So this is the average type for the types of teachers who choose performance paid jobs, minus the average type for teachers who choose flat paid jobs. So maybe there's different types of people that want each of these different kinds of jobs. So we're going to take the difference in the average of those two groups. There's going to be the average treatment effect of contracts. So basically the kind of average responsiveness of teachers to these types of incentives. And then similarly to this expression, there's going to be a sorting on treatment effects component. So there's going to be potentially a difference in treatment effects, so how responsive people are for teachers who choose a performance paid job versus those who choose a flat paid job, right? Again, people who choose these types of jobs might look different for lots of reasons, and they might have different treatment effects. So the goal of this project is going to be to estimate this expression, well, all three expressions, but the two in red are what we think are kind of the new contribution. Lots of people have looked at that middle term, the average treatment effect across all teachers. And so our contribution here is to also be able to look at how much sorting there is on type, this kind of innate ability, and how much sorting there is on treatment effect, so how responsive people are to this contract. Okay, so really briefly, the design, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and measure teachers' baseline value added before introducing any new contracts, so doing any sort of RCT. This is going to be our measure of type of theta, so teachers' innate ability in the absence of performance pay. Then we're going to go in and let teachers know that in the following year, there's going to be these new contracts in place, and we're actually going to allow teachers to pick what type of contract they get for the following year. So we're going to say you can choose a flat pay contract or a performance pay contract. And we let them know that we're actually going to implement their choice for a subset of schools randomly selected. So this is a high stakes decision that they're making. They could actually get the contract that they said that they wanted in this elicitation activity. So they know that this is, there's a lot of money on the line here in this decision. So we do that, we actually implement for a subset of schools, teachers get the contract that they said they wanted. This is randomized. And then we have a bunch of schools that are left over, and we're going to use that as our RCT sample. So we're going to randomize schools to either receive performance pay or flat pay. And then we're going to measure outcomes in the following year. So our end-line testing that we conduct with students is going to help us measure beta, the average treatment effect. So we can look just again at this RCT sample. So we're going to ignore this group for now. And just say for all teachers here in our RCT sample, what's the average treatment effect? And we're going to be able to look at the treatment effect by whether or not in the baseline survey, teachers said that they wanted performance pay or not. So in this incentivized elicitation, we now know, what types of teachers are choosing performance pay versus not, and we can look at the difference in treatment effects for this group. The other thing we want is as I mentioned in the model, we want to understand teachers' actual job choices. So we're going to have that information in two places. First, we have their incentivized contract choice that they were making in the baseline survey. And then we also have real job choice decisions in the second year of the program, because during the implementation here, we have a summer break that happens, and during this time, there's a lot of turnover. Teachers leave the school system, they switch to different schools within the school system that we're working with, and so we can see where they end up working in the second year. And then because all of this is about trying to understand what is it that teachers know about their own type relative to the information that their employer has, we measure principals' beliefs about the quality of teachers at a bunch of different points in time. Really briefly, we're working in partnership with a large private school chain to implement this. The actual contracts were a flat raise. So this was a raise where all teachers would get a 5% raise at the end of the year if they're in the control group, whereas in the treatment group, their raise is going to be anywhere from 0 to 10%, depending on their performance, either in terms of value added or a subjective principal rating. For the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to pool both of those sub-treatments. We have a separate paper which looks at differences across those two. And lots of data, administrative data from our teachers and students in this sample. And everything looks balanced at baseline. Okay, so jumping into the results. First off, what we find when we look at who are the teachers who chose performance pay contracts versus those that chose flat pay contracts. So in that incentivized elicitation, we can see just what are the types of baseline value added for those who chose each type of contract. What we see is there's a significant difference in the distribution of teachers who chose performance pay, the solid line, versus those who chose flat pay. It's really just the whole thing has shifted over. So it seems like teachers do have some private information potentially about their quality, because the higher value added teachers are more likely to choose performance pay. These effects are statistically significant and is equivalent to about a 0.03 standard deviation increase in student test scores. We can also look at the other measure of job choice, which is where people chose to work in the second year. So this is after the introduction of the RCT. We've introduced the new contracts at the school level, and then we see in the second year where are different teachers ending up working. What we find is, again, positive sorting, but the magnitudes aren't as large in this setting where teachers now have to actually switch jobs in order to get the contract that they want. We find about a 0.008 standard deviation difference in those who end up in treated schools versus control schools. And you can see that in terms of the distribution here, that there's in control schools much more of these kind of below average value added teachers, whereas in the treatment schools, there's a more average and slightly above average teachers in treated schools. We can also control principals' information and lots of other characteristics we have, and this difference doesn't go away. It does look like there is some private information that teachers have about their quality. Lots of other results, just briefly, I'll leave it up so you can take a look or pause the video, but mostly this is coming from switchers within the school system. So remember, we partnered with a large school system to implement this. So these are teachers moving to different schools within the school system. There is a small effect on teachers leaving the school system, but mostly the effects are coming from switchers. We don't see big differences by experience or age. There is something happening in terms of differences by gender. It seems like most of this is driven by basically high quality female teachers staying in performance-based schools rather than leaving If you happen to be a high quality teacher in a flat pay, in a school that was assigned flat pay, you're much more likely to leave. And leave in this case generally means leave the labor market, because the majority of teachers who are leaving this teaching position are leaving the labor market, at least for a few years. There's also some other interesting correlations. I don't have too much time, so I'll skip for now. Okay, so those results were estimating that first blue term that we had, whether or not there was sorting by teachers' innate kind of underlying ability. The other type of sorting that we're interested in is whether or not teachers who go into performance-based schools have larger treatment effects. So they have a larger motivational response in response to these contracts. So the average treatment effect that we see is about 0.08 standard deviation. So for our full RCT sample, we see about that effect on test scores, which is pretty much in line with what other studies have found, usually around a 0.09, 0.1 maybe standard deviation effect of performance pay on test scores. But when we split this by whether or not in that baseline incentivized elicitation, teachers chose flat pay or performance pay, we see a really big difference. The effects are about twice as large for those who chose performance pay. And this is quite a large magnitude in terms of effects for 1 year of a performance pay contract. So it seems like the types of teachers who are going to end up in performance pay schools in the long run might have much larger effects. So estimating these kind of 1 year off effects on teachers isn't really telling us what the total effects might look like in the long run for schools. A couple other quick results. We also see that there's less positive sorting when switching costs are higher. We see that when we give people information about their historical performance, that makes them positively sort more. And so just to kind of wrap up, if we add up those three terms, the average treatment effects, the sorting on type, and the sorting on treatment effects, we end up getting somewhere between more than double and about 130% of what the effect would be if we were just to look at that one-off 1 year effect of performance pay. And this is really important because, for policymakers, if they're introducing these types of contracts, what we need is those long-run estimates of both the direct effects plus the sorting effects. And this gives some suggestive positive evidence that those sorting effects could be substantial. Thanks so much, and do let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much.